It's Monday, the 11th of April. I am confident, the Chancellor writes to the Prime Minister, for an investigation into his own financial affairs after days of questions over his wife's tax status and his US green card. A tense week ahead, a warning from Ukraine's President. Russia military vehicles are heading east, explosions heard in 2 eastern cities overnight.
And a move too from Austrian to Austria's Chancellor, who's been here in Kyiv and is going to Moscow today. We'll tell you why.
Mind the gap, the battle for the French presidency now between Emmanuel Macron and far-right candidate Marine Le Pen, who's narrowed his lead. Easter travel warning, the busiest in 8 years, with fears too over the price of filling up the tank after weekend oil protests. Lockdown looting, fighting for food in the streets of Shanghai as some run out of supplies.
I'm at Buckingham Palace as the Queen reflects on her recent bout of coronavirus.
It does leave one very tired and exhausted, doesn't it?
Also coming up on the programme for you this morning, wherever you're watching us around the world, Gender X. As the US issues its first gender-neutral passport, we'll hear from a campaigner who's fought for the same to happen here in the UK.
When you're back on the raft, you just realise that was so close. That was literally fighting for your life.
Be joined by the British teenager who survived a crocodile attack in Zambia as she prepares to return to help build a school for the locals who helped through the ordeal. Morning, everybody. Please investigate me. That's the Chancellor's request to the Prime Minister this morning. Rishi Sunak has written to Boris Johnson asking for his financial affairs to be looked into. It follows criticism about his wife's tax affairs and his US green card. In his letter to the PM, Mr Sunak says this: "My overriding concern is that public retain confidence in the answers they are given, and I believe the best way of achieving this is to ensure those answers are entirely independent, without bias or favour. To that end, I would recommend that Lord Geidt makes all his conclusions public. I'm aware and confident that such a review of my declarations will find all relevant information was appropriately declared. I have, throughout my ministerial career, followed the advice of officials regarding matters of propriety and disclosure and will continue to do so." Coming up, we're going to be speaking to the Environment Secretary and ask him about that, along with many other things as well. But first, let's find out what's happening in Ukraine this morning. And explosions have been heard in 2 Ukrainian cities overnight as President Zelensky's warned Russian troops are ramping aggressions in the east of the country. Ukrainian media is reporting a series of powerful explosions being heard in the northeastern city of Kharkiv, as well as in the southern city of Mykolaiv. It comes as President Zelensky issued a fresh warning that Russian troops are ramping up military aggression in eastern Ukraine. Meanwhile, the World Bank is forecasting that Ukraine's economic output will contract, I should say, by more than 45% this year as the war forces businesses to close. Let's take a closer look at how the Russian troops are believed to be refocusing their military efforts after failing to capture Kiev. Western intelligence suggests that Russia will now focus on consolidating their hold on eastern regions such as Luhansk and Donetsk, with new images also showing a large convoy heading towards the eastern city of Kharkiv. President Zelensky has also sounded the alarm in recent days over the key southern port of Odessa on the Black Sea, which is expected to come under renewed attack.
They can use more missiles against us, even more aerial bombs, but we are preparing for all of their actions. We will respond.
Well, our Defence and Security Editor Deborah Haynes is joining us now live from Kiev this morning. Hello to you, Deborah. So from what we're hearing, more and more concern from the Ukrainian politicians that Russia is regrouping for another attack.
Yes, we really are moving into the second phase of this horrific war. We're in the 7th week now. The capital is pretty calm. Ukrainian forces here managed to repel Russian attempts to try to come into the capital, topple the leadership and effectively impose a pro-Moscow government. That didn't happen. The Russian troops withdrew, having sustained significant losses, in the words of their own spokesperson. And now they're moving down to the east and the south, where it has been the scene for the last 7 weeks of heavy bombardments, and the expectation and all indications are that there is going to be an even greater onslaught down there, and that is why you're seeing many more civilians evacuating, despite the concern that Russian troops could be even targeting the evacuation points, and all the while efforts still to find some kind of diplomacy to work to end the fighting. And that's why you've got Austria's Chancellor heading to Moscow today to talk to Vladimir Putin. It's the first time a European Union leader has had face-to-face conversations with the head of the Kremlin. He's been here, the Austrian Chancellor, in Kyiv on Saturday, the same day as British Prime Minister was in town. And now he's going to Moscow. It's interesting because Austria is a military neutral country. That means it's not a member of NATO, and yet its position with regards to Russia's war of aggression, which is the words that the Austrian Chancellor uses, is clear. And in a tweet that he posted yesterday evening about his trip, he said that his intention is to make sure that the war stops. Humanitarian corridors, a ceasefire and a full investigation into war crimes are needed.
OK, Deborah, for now, thanks so much indeed. Thanks a lot. We know that our own Prime Minister was actually in Kiev over the weekend. Joining us now is the Environment Minister, George Eustice. Hello to you, Mr Eustice. A bit of a surprise that we saw our own PM in Kiev, cementing, I suppose, the conviction that the Brits are doing what they can to support Ukraine in this, their hour of need.
Well, absolutely. In fact, I think the whole world is coming together to show solidarity and support of Ukraine about what's happened. That's why the Prime Minister announced yesterday that we would be making available more, defensive military equipment to the Ukrainians, additional missiles and so on. We've been giving them support from the beginning. But also it's so important that we remain absolutely resolute when it comes to sanctions against Russia. We must ensure that Putin cannot prevail on this. The Ukrainians have been incredibly brave. I think President Zelensky has led his people well, and we've all been humbled really by the acts of bravery we've seen, but also deeply shocked by some of these terrible scenes that we're seeing coming out now from the cities from which Russia's withdrawn.
Yeah, an A-star then for the support for Ukraine on the ground, but must try harder when it comes to refugees. Even Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, apologising for the fact that we are not moving quickly enough to help refugees who want to come to the UK.
Well, obviously, it's different for countries that are bordering the Ukraine, because people fleeing a war like this obviously will cross the nearest land border. And that's why countries like Poland and Hungary obviously are getting more of those refugees coming in. But we have now issued visas under the two schemes we've got, in particular the sponsorship scheme, to around 40,000 Ukrainians, and around 12,000 of those are already here. We've made some changes already, making clear, for instance, that those with a Ukrainian passport don't need to attend an appointment in person. And I know that Priti Patel's looking very closely at this to look at whatever else can be done to remove any barriers as and when those arise.
Yeah, well, Dublin doesn't border Ukraine either, but they're doing a lot better than we are.
Well, look, there are, as I said, some differences between countries, but Priti Patel's already made some changes, removing that need for an appointment in person for those with a passport. She's also made clear that if there's other things that we can do to speed up the process, we will. There's been a huge outpouring, I think, of generosity around the country, different local authorities seeking to be involved. We financially supported around 27 local authorities to stand up hubs and reception centres to help refugees that are coming here. And I think many people want to do their bit to help.
OK. Do you understand why people are angry about the revelations about Rishi Sunak and his wife?
Well, look, Rishi Sunak and his wife have spoken for themselves on this. I'm not his accountant. I'm not responsible, obviously, for his tax affairs or those, indeed, of his wife. She gave a statement over the weekend. She's now made clear that although she hasn't done anything wrong, she's a citizen of India and grew up and was born in India and has some income from that. Nevertheless, she's changing her tax arrangement so that she would pay the tax on that income here in the UK. And Rishi himself, there's been some speculation around that. He's written to the Prime Minister and asked the advisor on ministerial standards to look at this case. He's very clear that he's declared everything that should have been declared at the right time. And there is a process here that you have as a minister. You declare all your interests to the permanent secretary in your department, and the cabinet office then decide which bits should be made public, which bits they should be aware of. There's a duty of candour in both directions, and Rishi's very clear that he's been very candid about his own arrangements at every stage. And
in answer to my question?
Well, your question was, are people angry about this? And I've just set out the position and how they've responded to it.
Yeah. Do you understand why the British people are angry that the man who has increased tax for them, his wife was not paying tax on overseas income to the extent of millions of pounds? Do you understand why there is anger amongst the British public on that?
Well, look, I think people should judge the Chancellor. He is
Why don't you just say yes?
Chancellor.
I mean, it's obvious. It's obvious. I mean, are you so out of touch as a government that you don't understand that people are struggling to feed their kids, whereas the man who's enforcing these laws on them, these taxes on them, is rolling in it?
Well, the man who is Chancellor at the moment has paid all of his taxes and paid taxes on his income and declared all of that in the UK, and he's been clear about that. And that's, of course, there is a pressure on cost of living at the moment. We all recognise that. Now, we all recognise that there are some difficult decisions coming down the tracks when it comes to tax to help get the NHS back on track. But we're also doing all that we can to help people through these difficult times.
OK. What about his green card? I know he's given it up now, but he was Chancellor when he had a green card for residency in another country while he was responsible for UK tax.
Well, look, he worked in the United States and for many years. He was based out there, lived out there, worked out there. And yes, there was a hangover from that period when he was working in the US where he retained that green card. But obviously, he got rid of that a couple of years ago, I think.
No, he was still an MP. In October.
Well, he's got rid of the green card now, but what I'm saying is...
My point is he was responsible for UK tax while he was resident in another country. That, according to, don't take it from me, according to some of your backbenchers, saying that it doesn't pass the political cricket test that you're committed to the UK.
Well, all I'm saying is he worked in the United States for a while. During that period, he had a green card. He kept that green card for a period after that. But as I understand it, it hasn't affected the tax that he's paid here in the UK.
That's not my point. My point is that he was a resident in another country and he was responsible for what you and I and my viewers this morning pay in tax. How does that pass the test of fairness?
Well, he had a green card, a US green card, and I'm not an expert on that. Never had one myself, nor would I ever seek to have one, to be honest. But look, he's now referred himself to the advisor on standards of ministerial interests. Lord Geit will look at all of this and will, make an assessment about whether he declared all the right things at the right time.
Sajid Javid now revealing that he previously had non-dom status. Can you anticipate anybody else in the cabinet coming forward to say the same thing?
Well, I don't. All I can tell you, as I said, I'm not the accountant for my ministerial colleagues in cabinet. I don't know anybody who may or may not have had non-dom status. I can tell you that I never have and would never seek to have one.
That's something we have in common. Should spouses ever be fair game?
Well, look, I think in reality, I think when it comes to politics, we all know that there's a heightened level of scrutiny for those that get involved in politics, and that can affect family. Should it? I think it probably shouldn't. I think politicians who put themselves up into public life expect that higher level of scrutiny. Often with that will come some extra scrutiny on their family, and that's understood. But I think generally, no, I think it should be the focus on those elected politicians, what they do principally in the job. And I think it's wrong that families should be drawn into it in that way.
Do you think that we, as the British public, should have any view on the fact that Mrs. Murty, although she's now saying that she will pay taxes on her foreign income, which could amount to many millions of pounds, she won't have to pay inheritance tax because she's still a non-dom? That means she's going to save potentially hundreds of millions of pounds. Is that morally right?
Well, as I said, she is not the Chancellor. She's not in politics. She's the wife of the Chancellor.
If I may interrupt you there, Minister, no, but she was for a long time living in taxpayer-funded accommodation.
Well, and she has made clear, and, she's spoken for herself on these matters. She's not part of the government. It's not for me really to speak for her, but she has spoken for herself on this, that she's going to change her tax arrangements so that she does pay income tax on the income that she earns from overseas. There's nothing wrong with what she's been doing, but she said, nevertheless, that she will make that payment going forward. And I think it's for her really to speak for her own affairs on these matters. It's not for me, as I said, I'm not her tax advisor. She's not part of the government. It's not really for me to speak for her on her own individual personal tax affairs.
No, but my point is that she was living with the family in taxpayer-funded accommodation, and she was saving many, many millions of pounds by using her non-dom status. That has been brought to the public's attention, and the would-be Prime Minister has now decided that that will not happen going forward, but it's now become uncovered that she won't have to pay tax on inheritance, or she won't have to pay inheritance tax. And I'm asking you whether you feel, you must have a view, do you feel that that is morally right?
Well, look, the Chancellor, who's part of the government, has now, referred himself to Lord Geit and asked him to investigate all of his own arrangements, all of his own tax affairs and what he declared and what was made public on his ministerial declaration at the time. That investigation will take place. The tax affairs of his wife are a different matter. She has given an account of that over the weekend, made clear that she intends to pay tax on some of that foreign income going forward. And I think really, it's for her to talk about her own tax affairs. As I said, I'm not qualified to, I'm not her accountant, I'm not even an accountant at all.
But you are representing the government this morning, and you know
that's right. And she's not part of the government, but the Chancellor.
No, but she lived in taxpayer-funded accommodation. We've made that clear. She's married to a man who wants to be Prime Minister, who is charging people millions of pounds in taxes that they can ill afford at the moment. 500,000 kids are in real poverty, have been plunged into real poverty as a result of what's happened over the last few weeks and months. Does it not offend you in any way?
Well, look, I'm somebody as a cabinet colleague of Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor. I judge ministerial colleagues based on their performance in the role. And I think Rishi Sunak has performed very well as Chancellor of the Exchequer, doing some extraordinarily difficult times. And he himself has now referred himself to Lord Geit, the Prime Minister's advisor on ministerial standards, to look at these matters. And I'm really not going to get drawn into commenting any further than I have on his wife's tax affairs. As I said, I'm not qualified to. She's given an account of those herself. Every MP's family at some level, live in what you might call taxpayer-funded accommodation, because most MPs obviously, maintain a presence in both London and in their constituencies.
OK, something I know that you do want to talk about is the announcement that your department is making today. Tell me more.
Fly tipping has been a really difficult problem in recent years. And what we are announcing today is a couple of things. First of all, removing the charge that some local authorities, around a third of them, still charge people for disposing of items like plasterboard if they've been doing DIY. We're going to remove their ability to charge for that, to remove one of those incentives perhaps for people to fly tip. These items are often associated with fly tipping. But also linked to that on the enforcement side, we're supporting a number of local authorities with some pilot schemes using CCTV in a creative way to try to catch the criminals that are responsible for fly tipping. In most local authorities, it's a relatively small number of people, and we want to help them identify who they are so that we can bring them to justice and stop this problem.
OK, Minister, I must let you go, I know, but it's always great to talk to you. Hopefully see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Quick look at the morning's papers for you. Let's start with the Telegraph, leading on the news that Chancellor Rishi Sunak has referred himself, as we heard there from the Minister, to the Minister's interest watchdog after his wife's non-dom status and the US residency card he held while he was Chancellor came to light. The Eye front page also has the same story, with the headline, Sunak's hopes of becoming PM evaporate. The Times says the outcome of the French presidential election hangs in the balance after the incumbent, Emmanuel Macron, won the first round of the vote. The FT front page pictures President Macron face-to-face with far-right candidate Marine Le Pen, who came second in the vote and will face him in the second round of the election. Well, Monsieur Macron will face, as we say, the far-right candidate in the French presidential elections after making it through the first round. Monsieur Macron took the highest share of the vote with 27.6%. Ms. Le Pen received the second highest share with 23.4%. She narrowly beat the far left candidate, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, to the final round of voting. He came third. There he is, with 22% of the vote. Sally Lockwood reports now from Paris.
The big question dominating French politics, can the far right really win? After 5 years of President Macron, French voters are deciding his future at the ballot box. He won the highest share of the vote in this first round, but it's tight. The full verdict is still 2 weeks away, and a second term for the country's youngest ever premier appears vulnerable.
At this decisive moment for the future of the nation, nothing must be as it was before. I would like to take the hand of everyone who would like to work for France, to join me. I'm ready to invent something new.
On the other side of Paris, President Macron has the same rival once again. As Marine Le Pen arrived, I asked if she was feeling confident. A simple nod said it all. This is the far-right leader's third and final attempt at the French presidency. And if you go by the polls, she's never got as close as this. Marine Le Pen has presented a softer, more unifying image of herself in this campaign.
In this campaign, I decided not to be partisan, to be at the service of all and to directly address you. I will carry on doing so the day after the second round, not to exclude anyone, to be the president for all the French people.
Le Pen's decision to focus on the cost of living was a smart choice and won her a broader church of voters. Speaking less on immigration and Islam has helped to detoxify her brand.
Critics say she's changed her style, but not her far-right values. But this time, Marine Le Pen is far more palatable to many voters, and those voters are far less predictable.
Even Marine Le Pen's past praise for Vladimir Putin didn't dent her support during a horrifying war in Ukraine. The overall impression is French people are looking for a change. But that change could give Vladimir Putin a perceived ally in the Élysée Palace. France feels in uncharted election territory. Sally Lockwood, Sky News, Paris.
Still to come on the programme for you. A former US NATO defence official, Michael Ryan, will be with us to discuss Russia's refocus in the east of Ukraine and whether NATO is doing enough. As the US allows its citizens to select a gender-neutral X on their passport, we'll speak to a campaigner who's fought for the same to happen here in the UK without success. Drivers are being warned to expect the busiest Easter on record as millions of Britons prepare to hit the road this weekend. However, the suspension of sailings by P&O ferries has caused long tailbacks in and around Dover. The congestion is reportedly costing transport companies £800 per lorry, as British hauliers of perishable goods complain the long waiting times are causing products to rot inside the vehicles. And it's not just the ports that are under pressure. Airports have reported long queues over the past week as they struggle to find staff to cope with the demand after many lost their jobs due to the pandemic. COVID also a big problem, we're told. And we'll have more on that, in fact, from who we got? Simon Calder, I think, from The Independent. He's going to be updating us on Easter travel a bit later on. Meantime, Elon Musk has decided not to join the Twitter board despite becoming the company's single biggest shareholder. The social media giant CEO Parag Agrawal said that the Tesla founder relayed his decision on the very morning he'd been due to be officially appointed. Musk appeared to have been looking forward to joining the board, tweeting on Thursday that its next meeting was gonna be lit. Down with the kids. Let's look at some of today's other headlines for you now, should we? And Johnny Depp's multi-million-dollar US defamation lawsuit against his ex-wife, Amber Heard, is due to begin at a Virginia courthouse later on today. He claims he was wrongly accused of domestic abuse in an article she wrote for the Washington Post. A serving Metropolitan Police officer will go on trial today, accused of trying to meet a 13-year-old girl after online grooming. Detective Constable Francois Olwagi is accused of a number of offences, including attempting to engage in sexual communication with a child. Pakistan is expected to appoint an interim prime minister later on today. On Saturday, Imran Khan was ousted after losing a vote of no confidence. The vote was called after his opponents criticised him for not tackling corruption. The Queen's been speaking about her spell of coronavirus during a virtual meeting of hospital staff in London.
I'm glad that you're getting better, and it does leave one very tired and exhausted, doesn't it?
Sure does. Madeleine is at Buckingham Palace for us this morning. Hi, Madeleine. We knew that she'd had coronavirus. We didn't really know how badly she'd been impacted by it until now.
Good morning, Kay. That's right. When the Queen tested positive in February for coronavirus, Buckingham Palace said she was suffering from mild cold-like symptoms. But it's now that the Queen has revealed how, like so many other people struggling with the virus, she felt very tired and exhausted as well. She was speaking via video link at the official ward opening of the Queen Elizabeth unit at the Royal London Hospital, talking virtually with nurses there who had worked throughout the pandemic and indeed with a sufferer. That clip you heard there was her talking to Asif Hussain, who had been on a ventilator in the hospital for 7 weeks with coronavirus, and he told the Queen about how he had struggled with the virus, and that's when she revealed how it had left her tired and exhausted as well, and how it wasn't a very nice result at all. Since the Queen's diagnosis in February, she's obviously had to pull back on a lot of engagements. Lots of them have been virtual. And that includes this week where she's had to cancel her appearance at the Maundy Thursday ceremony ahead of Easter. Prince Charles will do that instead.
OK, absolutely. Thank you. Unrest is growing in the Chinese city of Shanghai after weeks of strict lockdown to curb COVID cases in the region. City of 26 million people has been under intense restrictions since the 28th of March, with residents only allowed to leave their homes once a day to collect food. Sky News has verified these pictures of looting in Shanghai that were shared on social media. People can be seen grabbing boxes and taking them away. Tom standing by for us in Beijing today. Hi, Tom. You predicted that this was going to happen.
Morning, Kay. I mean, I think it's really hard to predict anything that's happening with Shanghai. As you say, it's an incredibly strict lockdown, but what everyone's been surprised by is just how chaotic it has been on top of that. Before this lockdown, people were reprimanded for spreading rumours, as authorities called it, that there might be a lockdown. That lockdown went ahead, but the food supplies haven't been there. That's why you're seeing pictures like this. Residents aren't allowed to go to supermarkets as they were during the UK lockdown, for instance. They have to rely on the government to deliver food, and those supplies in many instances have not been getting through. We've seen looting scenes like that. Pictures you're seeing now of a compound called Kanting in Shanghai, where residents were confronting officials and police saying, we need food, we demand supplies. So there is that frustration growing, but it doesn't look like it's going to stop anytime soon. Shanghai reporting 26,000 cases. Might not sound like much compared to the average sort of UK numbers, but again, it's a new record. And that's why they are sticking with this dynamic zero COVID policy, as they call it. Now, Shanghai is at the eye, or in the eye of this storm, but there are concerns all around the country that these sorts sorts of scenes might be repeated. Guangzhou, which is a huge city in the south, a manufacturing hub, is entering some new restrictions. It's mass testing all its 18 million residents. And even here in Beijing, which hasn't had much in the way of COVID, there have been residential compounds being locked down, just as we saw in the early days of Shanghai just a few weeks ago, really. So that question of whether China will alter its policies, I think we had a pretty clear answer from Xinhua, the official state news agency. They said it would be disastrous if China abandoned COVID zero. The medical system will be overwhelmed. So they're going to keep going with this strategy until they get back down to somewhere near zero.
OK, for now, Tom, thank you. Thanks a lot. What's happening as far as the weather is concerned? Let's find out.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Southerly wind will make it warmer over the next few days, but will bring rain at times. Fairly mild generally, although parts of northeast Scotland are frosty. But it's windy in the south and the west.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Have a look at this. What Spanish police have uncovered. The civil guards are investigating a businessman in Valencia with a private taxidermy collection with more than 1,000 stuffed animals, including just over 400 from protected species and at least one already extinct. The collection is estimated to be worth almost 30 million euros on the black market, but its owner could now be charged with possible trafficking and other crimes against the environment. If he loves animals so much, why doesn't he just go and see them in the wild rather than stuffing a cheetah and thinking it's cool? Because it's not. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show this Monday morning here on Sky News. Top stories for you. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has written to the Prime Minister to ask for an investigation into his financial affairs to determine whether all his interests were properly declared. Explosions have been heard in 2 Ukrainian cities overnight as President Zelensky warned that Russian troops are ramping aggressions in the east of the country. And Emmanuel Macron will face Marine Le Pen in a runoff for the French presidency after the two make it through the first round of voting. A government minister has said an investigation into the Chancellor's tax arrangements will discover whether he declared the right things at the right time. The Environment Minister was speaking to this programme after Rishi Sunak asked the Prime Minister to refer him to Lord Geit, the independent advisor on ministers' interests, after days of criticism over his wife's tax affairs.
Rishi himself, there's been some speculation around that. He's written to the Prime Minister and asked the advisor on ministerial standards to look at this case. He's very clear that he's declared everything that should have been declared at the right time. And there is a process here that you have as a minister. You declare all your interests to the permanent secretary in your department, and the cabinet office then decide which bits should be made public, which bits they should be aware of. There's a duty of candour in both directions. And Rishi's very clear that he's been very candid about his own arrangements at every stage.
Ali's here this morning. This is not going away, is it?
No, it's not. Still recess, but this definitely isn't going away. I thought we had some interesting answers there from George Eustace, because he said he doesn't think the Chancellor's done anything wrong. He effectively sort of welcomed the Chancellor calling for this inquiry to look into his financial affairs. But he also, I think, wanted to distance himself from it in a way.
That's my interpretation.
Yeah, that was my take. What exactly he meant, we don't know. But I think he did say a couple of times on non-dom and on the green card, he said, I personally wouldn't have done that. He said, I've never, nor would I ever seek to have non-dom status. And for me, that I thought was quite telling. And I think the problem for people isn't necessarily that the Chancellor is a very wealthy man, although clearly that was brought into sharp focus last week. It's about this sort of sense of fairness, isn't it? And even if we have this inquiry now, and even if the Chancellor is found to have abided by the letter of the law, it's the spirit of the law, and it's how these things are perceived. And we heard his wife herself admitting, she said that there is a British sense of fairness before she agreed to change the way that she pays tax in this country.
OK, and what about the family moving out of Downing Street? Are we reading anything into that?
Well, they say the interpretation is that it is so they can be closer to their daughter's school, and she's in her last year primary school. I think, you know, people will make their own judgments. Obviously, the timing is interesting, but we do understand that they are moving to their West London home. They're going to be spending more time there, not in Downing Street. And I think, you know, the context of all of this, the cost of living crisis, that's the other thing that people are sort of struggling with. Even if he's a wealthy man, that's not necessarily, as I say, the problem. The problem is, can he really relate to people?
And he's given his green card back. He had it while he was Chancellor. Of course, one wonders, if anything, whether the US State Department might have anything to say. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But I know I've got Ali's Cake coming up at 9 o'clock. Look forward to it. Thank you very much indeed. Returning now to the situation in Ukraine, where President Zelensky has warned that Russia will intensify its military action in the east of the country. Let's speak now to Michael Ryan, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for Europe and NATO. Hello to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the programme this morning. What's your overarching view of what's happening in Ukraine at the moment?
Good morning, Kay. Thank you for having me. The Russians have clearly reassessed their objectives in the war and focused primarily on the east. Their major problem is that they have to reconstitute enough what we refer to as combat power, the ability to fight effectively in the east, and then take on a very entrenched and very experienced Ukrainian force that has been preparing for them for a long time. So the next 3 weeks will be decisive. It will determine the outcome of the war. And if we, the West, can increase our sense of urgency in supplying the Ukrainians, perhaps up to the level of the Berlin airlift, the Ukrainians can really come out of this with a victory.
I believe the US National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, saying that he expects Russia's newly appointed general to be even, I think his name's Alexander Doronikov, to be even more bloody and determined to break the soul of the Ukrainian people.
Yes, I agree with that assessment. The Russians are medieval, they're brutal, but they're not stupid. And so they learn, and they've learned quite a lot about how the Ukrainians are fighting. So I believe the general will go back to classic Russian tactics. They'll do massive air and artillery assaults on the Ukrainian positions before they throw a lot of tanks and a lot of soldiers at them. But it's going to be a difficult proposition for them because we just don't assess that they have the energy to be able to carry off that sort of campaign. And it will cause a lot of brutality, as President Zelensky has predicted. It'll look like World War II, as the Ukrainian foreign minister said. But at the end of the day, the Russians are going to suffer even more casualties in this approach.
We continue to hear that President Putin wants to de-escalate the situation in Ukraine. Should we believe him?
Well, frankly, I don't believe so, because the negotiations are now at a state where neither side really feels they have a strong position. And war is a continuation of policy by other means. And President Putin's policy obviously is the subjugation of Ukraine. And so anything that he says that tries to disguise that fact, I would not take as truth.
So given that you were previously the Assistant Defence Secretary for Europe and NATO, what's your interpretation of what his plan is? What's his end game?
Well, I think given the success of the Ukrainian military, his end game is shifting. His personal end game has to be to stay in power. And I think we have to look at everything that he does through the lens of that, because he doesn't have a lot of other options once he leaves government in Russia. And so his end game is to stay in power, which means he has to play to the domestic audience, which means he has to come out of this with a victory. And so enhancing the position of the Russians in eastern Ukraine, in ostensibly the Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine, by taking a land border, a land bridge, if you will, from the Donbass down towards the Black Sea, and enhancing the overall state of the Russians' ability to claim that they're supporting Russian speakers in Ukraine, I think will be enough of a victory for him to consolidate his gains, sue for peace, achieve some level of sanctions relief through negotiation, and then wait us out, wait a few years and try again.
Is that too much of a defeat for Zelensky, though?
Yes, Kay, I do believe it is. I can't see any negotiated settlement that results in the Ukrainians giving up even more territory as being acceptable to President Zelensky. And he has rightly said, whatever negotiations result, he has to put that to the Ukrainian people for their support. And I don't think they'll ever accept that.
In the meantime, I was looking at pictures of our own Prime Minister, actually, who was in Kiev at the weekend. We know that your President Biden, is hoping to speak to the leader of India, President Modi, we also know that India is still an ally, shall we say, of Russia and taking cut price fuel from Russia. Do you think that President Biden speaking to Modi will make any difference at all to the relationship between India and Russia?
Well, I think we're in this situation with India of incremental changes over time. The Indians are geographically situated between the Chinese, the Russians, and the West, and they're being very careful in how they're hedging. They clearly need the support of the West in their competition with China, and they balance their relationship with Russia to be able to maintain a level playing field, if you will, from their point of view. I think President Biden will have some influence. The United States and the Europeans have a great deal to offer the Indians. And the Indians are being very coy as to how they're going to position themselves for the outcome of this conflict. But I think very gradually, President Biden's influence and the influence of Prime Minister Johnson and other European leaders will bring the Indians more on side as they see that the Ukrainians are going to come out of this war with the Russians in a better position.
OK, we appreciate you, I don't know, getting up early or staying up late for us. I'm not sure which one it was, but either way, we do appreciate it here on the programme this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kay. Have a great day.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. You too. Well, from today, US citizens will be able to select the gender-neutral X as a marker on their passports, in a move announced last month by President Biden's administration to support transgender Americans. Let's speak to Christy Ellen Kane, a campaigner who took the UK government to court in December for not offering gender-neutral passports here in the UK. Morning to you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. When you see what's happening in the US, Christy, how's that make you feel?
Well, I'm really pleased for people in the US. I think it's brilliant that the states have joined a growing number of countries globally that have taken this progressive move. It's just really unfortunate that the UK doesn't seem to be able to grasp that X passports are necessary for some people, including myself and thousands of people in the UK and in the States and globally. And the X has been for some time a permitted option and in accordance with the international standards, but it's been down to individual nations if they want to actually incorporate the X into their own policy. And some countries chose to do that at an early stage, like New Zealand, Australia, and more recently Canada, Malta, and a number of countries in South America, Colombia, Argentina, Uruguay, and now the States, which I think will hopefully be a game changer. Whether that will make the UK government see sense and get on the right side of history remains to be seen. But I've gone as far as I can in the legal system in this country. And so my legal team and I are going to be now taking the case to Strasbourg, although Strasbourg wouldn't be able to undo the UK ruling, as it were. But I'm hoping that it might be a wake-up call for countries that haven't. And I don't think there's anywhere that I know of that has been as slow to act as the UK, where this issue has been raised, because most governments can seem to accept that there is a need for X passports. And it's something that is basically very uncontroversial in that it doesn't harm anybody else. It's just giving people such as myself that I do not identify as male or female. And it means that I'd be able to have a neutral passport that wouldn't force me to declare an inappropriate gender and have to carry that passport, that document around, which is supposed to be an identity document. And it has a gendered reference that I don't identify with. And to me, that's fundamentally wrong.
You've answered all of the questions I had for you, Christy, so I shall allow you to go and have a good morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. I want to talk to you more about what's happening as far as the Easter breaks are concerned. And Simon Calder, who is the travel editor of The Independent, is somewhere fabulously exotic for us this morning. Hi, Simon, where are you?
Good morning from beautiful Como in northern Italy. Kay, I managed to beat the cancellations and fly out here on Saturday night. A little bit late, but my goodness me, it's lovely to be here. Looking forward to a gorgeous day pretending to work. While, of course, being on holiday. But there are still a huge number of cancellations around. I have just counted at least 100 cancellations of short-haul domestic and European flights by both British Airways and by EasyJet today. Now, BA, which is, I make it cancelled 58, says that all of those were kind of decided a week or two ago, and therefore people have had plenty of warning to get their new flight arrangements in place. EasyJet seem to be about 48 hours notice. The law, fortunately, is very much on the passenger side. If your flight is cancelled, then the airline has to give you another flight, even if it has to buy you a ticket on a different airline. And furthermore, if you've been given less than 2 weeks' notice, it will always also be paying you compensation.
Yeah, which all sounds fabulous, but given that so many flights are being cancelled, there's no guarantee that even if your airline's not taking you, there'll be another airline available to do that.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of pressure on seats at the moment. Both BA and EasyJet say that the problem is really to do with high levels of COVID infection among their staff. Having said that, I think we have one Jet2 cancellation possibly and one Wizz Air cancellation at the weekend, compared with a couple of hundred on BA and EasyJet. So you can assess that. There is a fair amount of space around during the early part of this week. The weekend was very high pressure, but there are some spaces now. And actually, on the ferry front, things have slightly improved after the weekend. P&O ferries still isn't sailing between Dover and Calais. Those three big ships still tied up in Dover. But DFDS ferries, which is a rival shipping company, which has been mostly carrying passengers for P&O, has said, right, as from today, you can carry on sailing with us. And meanwhile, between Cairn Ryan and Larne, P&O ferries has resumed sailing. So there are now 3 voyages a day each way, which will take the pressure off Stena Line. Having said that, of course, a lot of people have said they really don't want to sail that much on P&O ferries after the way that they treated 800 crew.
Yeah, I think BA are apparently trying desperately to recruit lots of P&O staff as quickly as they possibly can to try to alleviate some of the issues. Looking at pictures from Spain, always love a bucket and spade holiday in Spain as a family, don't we? But Brits going to Spain, at the moment, there are still some challenges in place when it comes to COVID restrictions. Are those being lifted?
Oh, it's been a horrible, horrible week, particularly for people who, for whatever reason, are not vaccinated. Wednesday lunchtime, the Spanish Tourist Office in London said, right, we've opened up anybody who isn't fully jabbed, as long as you have a pre-departure test, lateral flow will be absolutely fine, then you will be able to travel to Spain without any problems. Unfortunately, they then retracted that 8 hours later, in the sense that they effectively said we misinterpreted an official bulletin, and having studied it, I can see how they would do it. So unvaccinated travellers to Spain are still not welcome. The one change has been that if you are fully jabbed and if boosted, if the second jab was over 270 days ago, then you no longer need to fill in that pesky passenger locator form. But one other country which has this morning said no more restrictions is the Czech Republic, which is joining Poland and Hungary in saying, oh, just come on in, no need to fill in any forms, no proof of your jabs, come and have a lovely holiday. And that's, I think, competitive reopening, trying to attract us back after 2 years of effectively no real tourist industry, is going to be happening more and more across Europe.
OK. Where's the best place to find up-to-date information? I was flying back on an aeroplane from Africa a couple of weeks ago, and the announcement via the stewardess was that we still needed to fill in our passenger locator forms. I pointed out to the stewardess that wasn't the case, and she said, yeah, but I just read what's on the sheet.
There's an awful lot of that. Yeah, we've been making these announcements. We've been saying this stuff, and the fact that it doesn't apply anymore is irrelevant. It's so difficult. So I'm here in this lovely, if rather expensive for me, hotel, and I was handed a serious piece of paper when I came in saying you've got to go and get a separate test from the local pharmacy in order to be able to allow in the breakfast room, because there's 7 months since my booster, and that matters in Italy apparently. Anyway, I didn't, and I was allowed to have my very nice breakfast, and that's gone for all the restaurants that I've been obliged to test so far. So it is very muddled. The only way to find out what the rules are for your country that you're going to is, well, I always check with the Foreign Office first of all, search online for Foreign Office and the name of the country, but then I double check with the tourist site, or indeed the embassy in London, to make sure I understand what the rules are. And then, even so, coming to Italy, I filled out the pesky European digital passenger locator form. Was anybody remotely interested? No, they weren't.
No, they're not. Simon, enjoy Lake Como, great part of the world. Thank you. Quick look at what the papers inside are looking at. Marlon's done these for us today. This is The Times, which has a lovely picture of Lily the donkey greeting a young boy ahead of Palm Sunday this weekend. Lily is going to be leading the first Palm Sunday procession since 2019 to Ripon Cathedral. Very, very pleased indeed. Not quite sure. Donkeys can bite, you know. Ginger nuts, that's what you need.